Welcome to Recross the Paths. My name is Cade. Today, my guest is Water the Weeds. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to get to talk about Cube.
Me too. It is always a treat, especially to sit down and talk about a brand new project. I mean, the one we're going to explore today, the Hall of Mirrors, is really just a few months old in its current iteration.
Yeah, it is just starting, and I have already been learning so much, and there's so much that I am going to change, but also so much that I like about it. But like, if you look at the list now, I wouldn't be shocked if like a third of those cards are gone within a couple months, because this thing is still totally in the working on it and playing it to learn more about how to work on it phase.
So like just by the time of publication, the list may look a little different is what we're saying.
Potentially, yeah. I've got plenty of notes on things that might come and go.
Well, we were chatting a little bit beforehand, and I think it's such a salient bit to get into some of your philosophy behind a project like this. But I'd love for you to talk a bit about your username, because I think this is really delightful.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going by the handle Water the Weeds. Sometimes people wonder what it means, especially since it doesn't flow off the tongue super well. And I've laughed that there's not a good way to abbreviate it. Like, you can call me Water, which is okay. You can call me Witwa or WTW, which is not great. Or like Weeds has too many connotations there. But the reason that I use that handle and really like it is like the idea of watering weeds being these plants that like don't necessarily contribute productively to like a garden or farm. That's how we define which plants are weeds, and like, what does it mean to nurture those parts of you that like are not defined as productive under like especially a very capitalist system is kind of the first layer of that. And also like to give and care for things that are not necessarily giving back to you in any obvious way, right? That kind of unconditional caring. And then also I joke that this is a thing that I will do very literally. And like, there was a year where I had a garden plot, and the garden plot next to me, nobody had planted anything in particular. And when I watered my garden plot, I watered that garden plot too, and got to see some really cool plants that are like potentially, native to the Chicago area, or just, their seeds were there and they were waiting, and things grew that I had never seen in that area before because someone was watering it through those hot months. So splash some water on plants around you during a drought or during those hottest weeks. And yeah, not expecting anything in return except to give a little something to these other creatures.
No, and I love that, because I think the way you describe that the outcomes aren't what you expect, that you
Yeah.
often get something back that's not what you planned or planted, that you put out there, but you just receive something back that wasn't there at first. So I think that's a cool philosophical place to go into a project like this. I mean, any cube endeavor, very rarely is that a financial pursuit. It's something that,
Yeah,
that
no,
brings
not
us
at all.
joy. I mean, if you know a financial outlet for this, let's chat. But, you know, but no, like, something like this that is for the love of the game, that's for the joy of doing it. I remember first reading about your project here, the Hall of Mirrors, and just it struck several chords for me, and I'm really excited to unpack it here. Before we get into that project, I like to ask here at the front end, Water the Weeds, why cube? Why that is a pursuit for you?
Okay, so I really have liked Magic the Gathering for a long time. I started playing in like third grade, and with a few breaks, I've kept coming back to it. It gets my game design brain thinking, and it's also a way that I've met some really, really close friends of mine. Like, some of my best friends are people who I've met playing Magic, and then from there, our connection has like gone on beyond Magic. And within Magic, I think fairly quickly, I was like, okay, I like limited. Constructed can be cool when we're playing and everyone has access to every card, and the format is something that hasn't been solved by pro players. But mostly, I like limited, where I always know that I'm going to get to do that solving myself with kind of a fresh pool of cards every time. And Cube has so many of the good things that come with limited. I play Cube because the people who design really good full custom sets don't organize weekly in-person meetups. For a long time, I was like fairly deep in the community of people making full custom sets, and there's some like wonderful sets out there that are like on par with what Wizards of the Coast pumps out. But that is almost all online play, and I want to be around people. So Cube, I think, catches a lot of that game design and a lot of self-expression and creating good gameplay, but also the people who Cube create this community that actually is meeting each other, has spaces where we hang out from week to week. Something that I've heard said and that I really like is that cube is kind of at the intersection of self-expression and empathy, right? If you're building a cube, on the one hand, that cube says a lot about you. It is your place to express what you love about Magic the Gathering. And there's so much self-expression that goes into it. And on the other hand, like if you're building a cube is a gift that you're trying to create a really good experience for the people who you're drafting it with. And that is a place of a lot of empathy, of stepping into the shoes of different types of players and thinking like, what is going to make these people happy? Where are they at? And like, how can I give that gift? And the fact that it sits at that like really nice intersection, I think makes it attract really wonderful people. I freaking love a lot of the people who I've met doing cube. I just spent the week in Sydney, Australia, meeting people who cube a lot over there, and it was a really great crowd. And because of that, I never regret having cube be one of the things that I'm passionate about because of the people that I find through it.
So how did you get from this desire to engage with like custom designs and game design in general to actual cube?
Yeah, so I have had a cube for a long time, for like about 10 years. The cube that I personally owned was a peasant cube. It was close to the top power of peasant, not without a few outliers, but still largely like from that power maxing ideology that I think makes sense because I started building it in 2015 when I didn't know anyone else with a cube and didn't have much exposure to cube except for those types of cubes and maybe some comments on an MTG Salvation forum about how to build a cube. And the gameplay I really enjoyed from that cube. I liked to say this is like clean Magic. It will shock you with how powerful it is while still like staying within the bounds of, you know, what feels like limited. But I didn't feel like it had that much self-expression in it. I feel like I got into talking a lot about Cube on the internet, listening to a lot of podcasts about Cube, and really loved to see how people made things that did say something about what they loved about the game and what they wanted to share. And that really got me thinking, hey, maybe I want to step outside of this browsing every new set and finding the strongest uncommons mindset and build something that's a little more personal and a little more curated, being like, well, if I had all the possibilities available to me, what would I want to do?
It sounds like that sensibility echoes some of your relationship with Constructed as well. Like you mentioned, it kind of feels like some of that can be solved in a way. Like as soon as somebody else has demonstrated the ideal pattern that people can copy in something like maybe a rarity restricted cube, that can feel solved in the same way. Am I reaching too far with that?
I think with building a cube that is largely about cutting the cards that don't make it into decks and adding cards that will make it into decks, and not really thinking about much except for a high flat power level, you're not doing that much designing. You're kind of at the whims of Wizards of the Coast, right? It's like, well, what did they print for me? I'm the curator a little bit, but largely this cube will flow towards, you know, if Wizards decides that the strongest thing to do is to have a bunch of food and clue tokens, then the strongest thing to do in my cube is to have a bunch of food and clue tokens. And if Wizards decides that we can print more 5-mana board wipes at uncommon, then suddenly, you know, my cube goes from having 1 board wipe to like 6. And that was kind of what building that cube felt like. Like I could sort of keep my finger on it, making sure that it was like fun, high agency games, but it was also really chasing what Wizards of the Coast was printing in a way where there wasn't that much space for creating something that really felt like my own. And I do think, okay, to go back to the original question, I do think that drive to create something that feels like my own has been part of why I haven't been into canon constructed formats.
That's fair. I was thinking there was something about the way you said it that just made me think about when you're trying to find just the most powerful cards within a particular restriction, that can be kind of solved by the group think in a way. You know, people come through each new set and it's like, here is the best new this type of spell or this type of creature.
Yeah, which on the flip, I think that solving those things together can be really fun. And I actually think one of the best parts about having a peasant cube is there's like 40 other people who also have peasant cubes following the same logic. And with every new set, we got to spend a couple weeks talking to each other about each of these cards and what it might do. And like building a cube that is similar to other people's cubes can open up some doors to be like, cool, we speak the same language, we're looking for the same thing. And then you solve it together.
I think that's a really thoughtful way to to think of that. Well, shall we dive into the project at hand? I realize we kind of danced past
Please
it a few
do.
times. So,
Please do.
so here at your own intersection of self-expression and empathy, we find ourselves in the Hall of Mirrors.
You want me to give a little pitch?
I would love that. Yeah, we're talking about today the Hall of Mirrors. Take it away.
Okay, the Hall of Mirrors is a cube where, after you have picked your 45 cards, you get to mirror 2 of them. And what that means is that you're going to get a second copy of those cards to run in your deck. There's a piece of paper behind every card in the sleeve. There's a printed copy of that card in black and white to make it easy to find if someone doesn't take their mirrors out after the draft. And you just slide that piece of paper out. You pick a card that you're like, I'm never going to slide this in. It was the last pick. You slide the piece of paper in front of it. Nice. You now have 2 copies of that card. And you get to get 2 copies of 2 of your cards. And I'm sure we'll go into in a second what some of the implications of that are on how decks end up and how you might think about that while you're drafting and deck building. Some other things of note, you can change your mirrors in between games. So you might be like, okay, in this matchup, I actually think I do want to switch A out for B. And it also just means if you're like, this isn't working for round 2, I'm changing up what my deck does. You cannot mirror the same card twice. Each card you can only mirror it once. Another thing about this cube is it has a rare section. So there's a core of the cube that's going to appear in each card that's in the core. If you're drafting with 8 players, it'll appear at 90-something% of the time. So you can largely expect those, though you can't be super entitled to them because there's a 10% chance it might show up. Then there's a rare section, and the cards in the rare section might show up in the draft about 30% of the time. You definitely can't super expect those to come your way, even if the lane is open. And that also has some really interesting implications that I really enjoy and was inspired by some other cubes that do a similar rare section thing, especially the Build Around Cube by Ryan Sachs has a rare section, and I really liked what that does to that cube. There's the pitch.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there. So I'll try to make sure we cover all these great salient bits. Since you mentioned Ryan Sachs's Build Around Cube, let's talk a bit of inspiration. How did you come to this idea?
Yes. Okay. Coming to this idea. Okay. A few things I really like in Cube and in playing Magic. I really like when the most exciting things to do are the interactions of cards rather than just the cards in a vacuum. And when there's not strict rails on how you're going to combine cards. Part of why I love this is it just leads to more possibilities, like the permutations of ways that you can combine cards if the strongest thing to do has to do with those combinations rather than just with the individual cards in your deck or with a fixed archetype that you managed to get into. Having that kind of vast possibility space. I also think that a lot of things that feel like interesting combinations of cards can feel bad when you don't draw your pieces together. And because of that, sometimes, I'll draft a cube and be like, oh, this looks really cool, but probably the correct thing to do is to pick removal and threats with good rates. And I do want a cube that can handle people who are trying to win and might just be tempted to pick removal and threats with good rates.
Yeah, the perennial heartache of synergy cube designers, right?
Right. And so for a long time, I've been like, okay, how do I get people to be really intrigued by trying to build around certain interactions? And especially when you can say this cube with 500 cards might have, thousands of interactions that are exciting enough to want to, at least make it a package in a deck, if not the main focus of the deck. How do we let those things shine? Probably the first iteration of trying to solve this problem was with a custom set called The Unraveling, which I won't get into, but if anyone here has played MSE Modern, they might have heard of it, which addresses this with conspiracies called puzzle boxes that you can unlock the puzzle box to put the card under it into your hand. So you choose a card that you drafted, plus the conspiracy, basically spending 2 picks to set up something that's kind of like a companion with a condition to unlock. This was before companions. That was really cool. That was in a custom space, slightly different rules than designing cube with cannon cards.
But still, you're kind of playing with some of those same ideas of balance and interaction.
Yeah, and then I had the good luck to draft the companion cube, which I think is a similar idea right there of having a card that a person can reliably get. And my experience with the companion cube, it's an awesome cube, was that I tried to draft an Allurin deck. I picked up a bunch of nice creatures that cost like 2 or 3 mana that maybe provided some value. I looked for interesting combos with the Harpy. And then I was like, this pile of like strong 3-drops, I think I would be better off companioning Birds of Paradise than Alurin, because it's gonna do the thing I want faster and more reliably. And I did in fact play like a very low land count, slam your birds and start slamming threats type of deck.
For clarity, Companion Cube is Greg's project wherein you may companion any card in your deck before each game. So in a similar way, you just get to pick your companion straight from the command zone.
Yeah. So I think that started giving me a lot of ideas of like, okay, what if there's a cube that you could choose something and do something special with it? And I'm a sucker for permutations and possibility space. There's something I really like about choosing 2 cards, which is that it is enough that you can still track it pretty easily, and you can be like, well, what is this deck? This is my Greater Gargadon Titania deck. This is my Wilderness Reclamation Nexus of Fate deck. I think once you start making a deck around like 5 things, you might as well just call it aristocrats or tokens or something. But when it's 2 cards, it can still feel like a strong identity, but the number of types of unique things that can come up can be much more different from game to game, because, the next game, you've got Wilderness Reclamation, you don't have Nexus of Fate, and you're like, this is my Wilderness Reclamation Shark Typhoon deck. It's a little different. So that sweet spot of 2 special cards really spoke to me. And kind of the first thing that I tried putting together a list for in this space was something that I called the Co-Conspirator Cube, where you got to take 2 creature cards and turn them into conspiracies with the same rules text. So I tried to make like a third of the cube be creatures that had either like static abilities or activated abilities that didn't require them to be on the battlefield, and did something interesting, but not too powerful. I tried to make sure the abilities would be like on par for like a 1 mana enchantment, maybe, nothing too crazy. And then the creature, if you actually just decide to not make it a conspiracy, had to have good enough power and toughness that it was still a fine card elsewhere. And so that let you have access to 2 consistent effects from the start of the game. And the issue was just how complicated. I never built this, but I chatted with a lot of people about it. And having each player start with 2 of those effects was very complicated and very much diverged from regular Magic, where you can use your normal heuristics about how to play the game.
Something much more grokkable about, you just get an extra copy of these cards, then, here, get out your sketch pad. We're going to start building these.
And again, I'm a big fan of your podcast. I got to listen to a lot of episodes here about different ways that people have tried to make their cubes interesting. So I think a lot of people are in the same space of like, how do we make cubes about interactions of cards? And there's like different ways that people approach that. And like, I think an example that's on my mind right now is the Take 5 cube that people might have heard of on Lucky Paper Radio, which I think really pushes to be about interactions of cards by making the things that are not interactions of cards. How would I say it? The best thing to do in the cube is to combine janky cards in ways you've never combined them before.
Yeah, because like you can't guarantee access to certain other things. Like you just have to make the most of what you have on hand.
Right. So it seems like a lot of people are puzzling around in this space. And I wanted to try my hand at it. There's also been like a lot of kind of emblem/clown shoes cubes that are like various degrees of recontextualization. And one reason that the Hall of Mirrors attracted me, like this specific rules modification, is because it's not really a recontextualization. Like none of the cards do anything except what they say. It's kind of like just getting 2 more picks that you have some good options for. And because of that, you can expect cards to perform how you expect them to perform, and people's like associations with those cards hold true.
Yeah, like you're really adjusting consistency more than context.
Yes, exactly. It takes that idea of like making your deck about 2 cards and sort of tones it down almost as much as you can. This is like the smallest thing you can do to make your deck about 2 cards. And it gives the consistency, I think, to make strategies work that would probably otherwise just not be as good as playing the top rate cards. I also think like when people draft these cubes, there's kind of 2 different directions it'll go. Either they see something fairly early where they're like, I am mirroring this and it is happening. Or they get to the end, they cut down to 21 cards, and then they say, okay, what are cards 22 and 23 going to be? And they take a good look at their deck. And both those approaches lead to really fun decks.
Yeah, and you've kind of already answered this to a degree, but I want to make sure I want to ask, why 2? Like, how did you land on 2 as opposed to just 1 or maybe more?
if you do one card, you're more likely to pick a card that someone else has already picked and be like, okay, my deck is a slightly better or slightly worse version of this deck I saw 2 weeks ago when we drafted this cube. With 2, that does not happen as much. Even if the same archetype, like, blue-white control gets drafted multiple weeks in a row, it's very unlikely that they're going to be mirroring the same things. The rare section also helps with that. I think it's really cool that every time it feels like you are solving this thing for yourself, it's got that energy of like a roguelike run or, playing in a auto battler type game where it's like, these are the cards I've got. The thing I do with it is maybe something I've never seen someone do before, but you've got to figure it out. And 3 is too many. I think it stops having quite so much identity when you're like, this deck is about 3 things, and maybe gives a little too much space to be like, okay, I've got 2 things I like and then like a nice piece of removal or a nice piece of fixing. 2, I think, is tight enough that you're usually not going to be mirroring up on like the just fine cards that you want a little more density of.
Yeah, and there's so much I want to unpack with mirrors. So let me start with the basics. You said you physically represent these by a slip of paper that is behind every card in the cube, right? Kind of a duplicate of that card. And then you take that out when you choose what you want to mirror and put it in front of a different card that you're not using, right?
Yep.
Did you test other things to get to that point? Or is this like you kind of solved that one on the front end?
I did ask the question of how are we going to implement this, and laid out some of my goals. I don't want people to have to search through a big stack of cards. Basically, I want it to be as physically intuitive as possible to make these mirrors and not time consuming. And I wanted to make it not confusing to take apart the decks and put the mirrors back where they belong. So yeah, easy to set up, easy to take apart. I ruminated on these needs for a while and settled on slips of paper printed in black and white behind every card, identical to the card.
Well, and speaking of setup time, that sounds like a prodigious amount of setup on your side to prepare all that.
I was really lucky to have friends who helped, but yes, it was quite a bit with a paper cutting and printing at a library and sleeving things up.
Does that kind of front-end work make it less enticing to make changes as it goes?
It means I'm going to be making my changes in big batches, and a big reason I was already doing that is because I proxy all my cards with make playing cards, and so I'm going to have a list that I have printed, a working list that I make changes to, and then probably after maybe 2 months of getting the working list I make changes to a place that I'm satisfied with, I'm going to order the cards, print the cards. But yeah, I think that it is unlikely that this is a cube where you'll just see 1 or 2 cards change at a time. Though I did hotfix that after the very first draft. I made a few hotfixes for cards that were causing trouble.
Sure.
And because of that, there's some printed paper proxies that are not mirrors and they're in color, which is how you can tell them apart so that people know this is actually meant to be in the cube. It's not a mirror. The other logistical thing that I spent a while figuring out how I was going to implement was the rare section. And I know you might get into this in a second, but I ended up going with these nice sparkly inner sleeves. So you crack open your booster pack, you've got 13 normal cards and 2 sparkly cards. And the nice thing about those, initially I was like, I don't know if I even want to inner sleeve everything. These are just printed proxies. I could just put a sticker on every card, a sticker on each rare to mark that it's rare. But I like the sparkly inner sleeves because it also means I can switch cards really easily between the rare section and the main cube, which I definitely will be doing. There's some cards that I'm like, I would like to see this almost every time we draft. And there's other cards where I'm like, no, I think I want to see this every so often, but less than I'm seeing it right now.
Yeah, and we'll definitely unpack more on the rare module. I think those sparkly sleeves, because I've had some folks ask about them for other projects. I think Prismatic Defender is a company that makes
that's
those.
The one.
And they have a variety of different patterns that you can choose. But yeah, I've seen those used for a couple different things. And you're right, it makes disassembly so much easier. With the mirrors, you mentioned you're allowed to switch between games, or like as you're making decisions before games. Have you found in your early runs here that folks are generally sticking to the ones that they choose initially, or is there a lot of swapping happening?
I have found people stick to what they chose initially unless they didn't like the way their deck played game 1. And then they switch things out. I've mostly curated the list so that there's not like hard sideboard pieces that you would really want to switch into a mirror for game two. That being said, I think you might sometimes realize a card is just not good in this matchup and want to swap out your mirror. You know, like if you mirror up on your board wipe in your control deck because you picked one board wipe and you want to, and then you face like an artifact deck that has very few creatures that would die to that board wipe. Yeah, it doesn't hurt to do a little sort of sideboard mirroring and unmirroring. But I have not seen very much of that. I think I've done it once. I've drafted this now like 4 times. And there's been one game where I'm like, okay, I need to change up my mirrors for this sideboard. But not a ton of that. More often, if people are changing their mirrors, it's because they realize they want to play a different deck. And I'm really glad that people are able to make that change and not feel locked in.
To your credit, I will say that it's also very like pleasant to describe changing your mirrors. Like just using mirror as a like in that way just makes sense. So it's nice when those ideas are.
Yeah, I thought of a few different names for this cubes with different things to call the like duplicate cards, but other people pushed me towards mirrors because I pondered like calling them like counterfeits and a counterfeit cube where you're like making these fakes of cards. I pondered like a duplicator cube with duplicates and specifically referencing the duplicator from Calvin and Hobbes, which is a cardboard box with the word duplicator on it.
Oh yeah.
Which could be a cool visual aesthetic for a cube. But I think the name Hall of Mirrors, I want to credit Arlo for that. I could be wrong here. Was like, that's the one that hits. And that's the one I've been sticking with. And my partner also pushed me that like Hall of Mirrors is way cooler than any of the other names, and calling them mirrors is the thing to do.
Well, it definitely sticks. You know, one of the things you talked about in terms of trying to design this project in your overview was about trying to avoid things that players would automatically mirror. How does that impact your decisions in putting this together to try to avoid that?
Yeah, I think there was a category of cards that I was like, if you give this to a player, they're going to probably feel like it's wrong to mirror anything but this. And I think like a go-to example is Swords to Plowshares. If you're building a synergy cube and you put that in someone's hand, they're gonna just want 2 of them. Another example is like lightning bolts. Another example is Bristly Bill. I thought was a little too good in the sense that like it's just you're gonna want 2 of those compared to some of the other things that are going on. And these are just my card evaluations. I might be wrong, but I think especially with removal, I want to have enough density of removal that people don't feel pressured to mirror them, but removal that's weak enough that you also don't feel pressured to mirror them, because the goal is to push people into mirroring these like strong synergistic combinations of cards and not just the things with the best rate. And it's fine if your deck is train wrecking and you're like, I need to mirror a fetch land, or like I am so short on 2-drops, I just need to mirror a 2-drop. I think it's fine that there's that safety valve, but it's not what I want people to feel like they're pressured into doing because a card I gave them is just too good.
You mentioned earlier that the presence of mirrors can drastically impact the drafting portion for players. How do you see that play out?
Yeah, so probably the biggest thing is that it is more comfortable to consider going in on a strategy, because usually if you see a card going around the table at Cube that has kind of a niche deck built around it, you might think to yourself like, that's cool, but it'll only work if I pick up like 7 or 8 cards that also play into this strategy, which is not guaranteed. It might be a wasted pick. And the ability to make speculative picks like that, you can speculate on cards in early packs and see if the pieces come your way, but there's a fair bit of caution there. I think that mirrors make it a lot more exciting to say, I'm going to take this. I could have 2 of them. I could have 2 of something else. The number of pieces that I need to make this deck come together are not so many. And that makes those things more enticing. In some ways, it also means you can speculate on multiple strategies because playables do feel abundant. I've had people say, especially when we were drafting with 10 players, so there's a lot of card selection opportunities, less so when we also did like one draft that had 5 players, where it was a little more scrappy. But especially in like a full 8-player draft or 10-player draft, 45 cards is so many. Because it is like 47 cards, but it really feels like even more, because if there are multiple possible ways to build your deck, you have +2 cards to each of those possible ways to build your deck. So mirrors can help you feel like there are no shortage of playables. This can be really nice for someone who maybe is a little newer, didn't totally know what they were doing. You might have some chance to save your deck. And I've told people, they're like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And I'm like, it will come together. You will get more cards, even if it feels like, oh, pack 2 is really dry on the thing you're trying to do. You will get more cards, and those mirrors have got your back. But also, you can speculate on multiple things and have a much greater ability to make it come together in the end, which means that decks that feel a little bit more niche get to come together.
I was wondering with something like the mirrors, does that slow down the deck building process at all? Like just with the wealth of possibilities that you have before you?
I would say probably by a few minutes, but not by anything that feels like I would notice it compared to the average cube. I do see people, looking at their 21 cards and saying, what am I going to mirror? What am I going to mirror? But also, if they don't like how it plays game 1, they can change it.
That's good. It's one of those that I know when I did the test draft preparing for this conversation, that was sort of my experience, was like, oh man, this could go so many different ways.
Yeah. I've had people say they're looking at their pool of 45 cards and they're like, there are 2 radically different decks I can build from this, and they both look solid.
Yeah. Truly, and like you said, like picking the key pieces that if you want to emphasize these two, it's going to look very different than if you emphasize these two.
Exactly, because then, what you mirror can change, what you want to include, which is part of why I think you don't always want to cut down to 21 first. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but if you emphasize a certain set of synergies, you might really want other cards that play into that.
Yeah, I appreciated you said one of your goals that you described was to have unique decks with strong identities. And I'm hearing more of that come through as you're describing this. Of yes, it's about the interactions, but it's so much about the identity of the deck that you could say, like you were describing earlier, this is my wilderness reclamation shark typhoon. You have these anchors that you can be like, this is the thing I put together.
Exactly. And I think what's cool is you're like, I made that, and that might not show up again for who knows how long, especially if it's requires combinations of cards from the rare sections, because any particular 2 of those do not show up together very often, especially not in the same drafter's hand. It can really feel like, remember that time last year I built that deck that no one even thought was possible, but I did it.
Yeah.
And I think there's something really special about that, akin to getting a really cool run in a roguelike game where you're like, wow, I did not think that was possible, but somehow the pieces came together and I stayed open to it and made something really exciting that also feels like there's a personal touch, It's not a situation anyone else has ever had to solve before.
Let's chat a little bit about the rare section. So you mentioned in a 15 card pack, you're going to have 13 cards from your core of the cube and then 2 rare cards in the section. So talk about what goes into the rare section and what makes it unique from the core.
Yeah. The rare section, a lot of my design philosophy there is I want these to be cards that hook you into something that you might not have been thinking about doing. There's often, in a synergy cube, there's a tension between these glue cards that are meant to sort of support a broad range of things and the more high synergy cards. And high synergy cards have a tendency to sit in people's sideboards because there's not just 8 decks that can be built at this table. And a lot of those cards might not be something that people are going for. And I want there to be a lot of possibilities without there being a lot of cards that wind up rotting in sideboards. And the rare section is a neat approach to this. I think it really is a treat for people who draft the cube a lot of times, which is a fancy way to say it's a treat for me, because I'm probably the person who's going to be drafting this particular cube over and over again. And I don't want to get to know these are the 2 cards I should be on the lookout for. They're really good together. If a card makes me go into a draft looking for it, I want to throw it into the rare section because I shouldn't be able to count on that.
Do you think of that as more you're trying to pick the things that are narrow or the things that are more powerful, or is it kind of a mix of those?
So I've always said that I want the most powerful things in this cube to be combinations of cards. And I think that is also a way to say that the most powerful individual cards should require a lot of support. So you might look at a card, you can say, well, that might be one of the most powerful cards in the cube, but only if the rest of your deck is doing the thing that it asks for, only if you can pick up these other cards that have really cool interactions with it. So I do think that the rare section should have a higher ceiling than the core, but maybe also a lower floor.
Justin Parnell has notably suggested that he really works to avoid building traps into a cube environment. Mm-hmm. So when you have these things, you talk about making sure that they're supported. How do you go about making sure that the stuff in the rare slots are supported? If you see it, you know that you can follow up on that.
Yeah, it's been hard. And the answer is I'm sure it's not perfect. I'm sure there are going to be cards that either I need to add more support for or I'm going to need to cut because they're traps. The way I've been kind of working on this cube is for a long time, not so much in the past week or two, but for maybe like 2 months, I would just do a daily draft on Cube Cobra just to build a deck. And I would usually try to start with a card that I hadn't tried before and see if the support existed or see if the deck, was a failure, didn't come together. And through that, I tried to get a sense of, okay, how many playables in this strategy can you pick up on average? Is there enough support? Is there not enough support? But that's going to be a long process of refining it. And I'm sure there are cards right now that someone who is a better cuber than I am could look at and say, like, even with mirroring two cards, this is not supported enough.
No, not better, just perhaps with different experiences. Do you think that with the cards in the rare module being marked specifically that it guides drafters to pick those more frequently or maybe even to mirror those more frequently?
That's a super good question. I should ask people that. I do think sometimes people say like, wow, that's an exciting sparkly card. Or they say, why is that rare? Is that even good?
Asking the real questions there, that's important.
So yeah, that is a great question. I do think people open the pack and they're inclined to go see what cards have sparkly sleeves on them. It's exciting to flip to the back, especially if it's like your second time drafting the cube. You've probably seen 80% of the cards in the core go around the table or be played in games against you. Whereas a lot of those rares you have not seen yet, and you might be like, oh, that's in the cube. I can build that deck. Okay, here we go. It does get exciting.
It's funny because you mentioned Ryan Sachs's build around cube, and I remember drafting that several years ago. And that I had that experience of opening a pack and going, well, this one's shiny, Where,
yeah.
Mercifully it was a card I wanted to take anyway, but like seeing that at several packs where you're like, these are things that I should make decisions on. Just interesting how our brains work that way sometimes.
It is. It's fun. It's fun. It gets to be a place for like slightly more exciting cards that I think would be a little warping if they were in the main section, especially if they're like strong enough that you could go into a draft being like, I didn't even open anything for this strategy, but I'm going to try to push for it because I know that strong card's coming around and I know I can get two of them. I think that can be dangerous if those cards are in the core. And again, I'm mostly speaking to myself of like, I like to go in trying to win, and I also like to do something new every time. And so selfishly, I try to build a cube where I get to design it, I get to try to win. I still have to do something new every time, and it doesn't always work.
Well, yeah, you have that built-in variety where, not only is it not going to look the same each time like a normal draft would, but you have the variety of each setup that's going to be completely different.
Mm-hmm. And I think another thing to say here is you could also achieve this just by having a larger cube and the like core effects like fixing and removal, just having more density of those. And in some ways, the rare section is a concession to fitting it in a box. Like it lets you get the variants you want without doubling up on all your glue effects and having a bigger cube.
Totally fair. When you are adding cards to this cube, do you anticipate that people will duplicate them? Like, do you think of each one as being a mirror potential, or is it like I'm just trying to build a core system and then let people figure it out?
I want people to look at a card and say, what could I do with two of those? Especially if it's a card that they've maybe passed up in other cubes because they're like, that's going a little deep and it might not come together. I want them to look at this in this cube and say, okay, but if I could have two of them, that could be a really cool deck. And so I do think about how cards could be mirrored. There is like a solid percentage of the cube that I don't think will ever be mirrored, like maybe like 30% of the glue cards. I'm like, I cannot imagine why someone would mirror this card. And I still put a paper card behind them just in case.
Yeah.
Because again, sometimes you need a 2-drop and whatever 2-drop you have, you're going to take another one.
Yeah, I imagine a few things would be more, debilitating to somebody to be like, I really need to mirror this one. And you have to tell them, ooh, I just assume nobody ever would.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be brutal.
Water the Weeds, I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about some of the things that you've done for accessibility in this project that I think are really interesting. Mm-hmm. One of the things I appreciate that you've done is to do a couple of custom proxies for this environment to fix a couple of things you noted as issues. Particularly, you're addressing things like reminder text, maybe doing some in-universe reprints, like patching up double-face cards to be single-sided. Talk about some of that process.
Yeah. So Part of my design philosophy with this cube is that I want to get as close to custom design as I can without turning off the people who would be turned off by custom design. And that is to say, patching up cards lets me have access to a bigger pool of cards that otherwise I wouldn't want for accessibility reasons. And of course, designing this cube, because I have spent a lot of time being a custom designer, designing this cube, there were a lot of moments where I was like, oh, there would be a custom card that would be so good for that role.
Yeah.
And I have held back on that because I want this to be a cube that is a canon cube. And if I make another cube, that will probably be a significantly custom cube. But for this cube, I want people to be able to go into it not expecting custom cards and to not have that expectation disrupted. Even though there are technically 4 custom cards in here, I completed the Horizon Land cycle with 4 allied cards for the allied color pairs. Nobody cares.
Right.
But I think using customs in other ways would cause issue. But I really like things that smooth out mana bases, like modal double-faced lands, or like with land spell MDFCs, and like the land cyclers from Lord of the Rings. On the other hand, I don't like DFCs. I don't like when a newer player has to unsleeve their card during the draft to see what the other side does. And honestly, I'm not a newer player, and drafting other people's cubes, there will be like a DFC from the latest set, and I will not know what the backside does, and I'm always having to peek at the other side. And I think it's preferable to not have to do that. So I made these very cool proxies that have both sides on one side, and I only did this with ones where the spell side is an instant or sorcery, so there's not confusion about tapping it. Those have played really well. Every time people have seen them, they've been like, wow, that's great. These cards should have looked like this. Did you make that yourself? And I'm like, yeah, I did. And thank you. And it is great. Similarly, I have tried to not include universes beyond cards for aesthetic reasons. On the other hand, there are some designs that I think really benefit the cube. And to solve that, I've been making universes within proxies. You know, the Lord of the Rings land cyclers are a great example. There are just some other cards that I think are really good glue that happened to be from like a Final Fantasy set. I'm sure there'll be more from Avatar that I'm going to be making these proxies of. I've done that to keep the aesthetic consistent. There's also a few universes beyond cards that are currently in the list that I still have to make a universes within replacement for, but I am intending to do that. And I feel like with this, honestly, kind of mixed results, because people will usually still just call Oliphant Oliphant. They're not going to refer to it by, you know, whatever name I've picked that's set on Domnaria. But I still do prefer it, and it means that I don't have to stress about like, oh, what is my limit with universes beyond? Like, Lord of the Rings seems chill, but like not Spider-Man, and like Avatar's kind of pushing it. Like, I don't want to have to think about that. I do want to have access to as many effects as possible, and I will happily make custom proxies if I can. I do include the name of the canon card using the nickname box from the Ikoria like nickname frame.
The little Godzilla stuff, yeah.
The Godzilla stuff, so that if you already know the card, you see that pretty much right away and you don't have to double read things, because I think it can be a little bit of a nuisance to be like, this looks like a custom card. I read the whole thing, and then I think for a while, and then I realize, oh, that's Gao Feral Youth from Final Fantasy. No, I'm going to tell you. Yeah, so that's one use for custom cards. The last thing that you did say was reminder text. I am strict in this cube that anything that is not like a very core evergreen keyword should have reminder text, because again, it is frustrating to have to be in the middle of a draft to be like, I don't know what that word does, and have to look it up on your phone. And I've seen that happen to lots of new players, or honestly, more often, they just pass the card. They're like, I don't know what suspend does. I'm not going to take this Greater Gargadon. Or it even comes up in gameplay. Someone, you know, is like, hey, I heard this Mother of Runes card is good. I'm running it. I don't actually know what the 5 things protection stops are and what the things it doesn't stop are, and like how many people really know that off the top of their head. So I've been pretty strict about reminder text. That also means there's a lot of cards I don't get to include, like Yawgmoth that has protection from humans as kind of trinket text. Doesn't necessarily improve the card, but I don't want to throw that in there without actually saying what humans can and can't do to this card. And it doesn't have space in the text box for that reminder text, so I'm not including it. I've also just like cut flavor text from some cards where I'm like, this card has teeny tiny text. I like the card. I don't know why Wizards would push something to 9 lines with flavor text. I'm going to proxy it up. And all of those things I think have improved the experience.
Was making these sorts of proxies an accessibility decision, or was this like an aesthetic decision? Was this like the sort of thing that you wanted for yourself, or is that like you were trying to think toward what other people are going to experience?
Think toward what other people are going to experience. Maybe think toward what I wish I had gotten in times in the past. But I would say accessibility more than aesthetic.
I love that phrase, what I wish I had gotten.
To kind of continue on this proxy thing, I do want to talk a little bit about like the DIY ethos of not waiting for Wizards of the Coast to give us better options. I think that Cube already kind of feels like the DIY side of Magic, of like, we're not sticking to the booster formats that Wizards of the Coast has given us, and trying to be as unconstrained as possible while still speaking the shared language of like, it is much easier to talk about my cube with other people when I can mention a card by name and they know what that card does and we have the same expectations for it. But within that constraint of speaking the same language, we're not going to let Wizards of the Coast tell us what to play or what not to play, or print cards that don't work because the text is split half between one side, half between the other side. And I really love the feeling that like cube designers are kind of collectively taking it into their own hands. And like all of these proxies that I've made are available on NPC Autofill, the site that makes it really easy to make orders from Make Playing Cards. Or you can just download the images there and print them yourself from a printer. And there's also a cool site whose name I forget that lets you arrange those images and print them from any printer you have. So the idea that I can be making these things not just for myself, but also to share, and also really encouraging other people to think like, hey, what have I been waiting for Wizards of the Coast to give me that I could just make for myself and make for others? Really brings me joy.
Yeah, you're talking about even some of the simple things like completing cycles that are bound to get completed one day,
Yeah.
or just the sort of things that people will use right away.
Those Horizon lands, among other cards, I've printed and just sent to other cube groups because I've thought, hey, you know, if I'm able to do a bulk order, because that's kind of what makes this printing and shipping efficient, people are going to enjoy these. And people have said like, oh, my favorite thing from this pile of proxies is having Allied Horizon lands that a lot of cubes want. Another thing that I want to talk about is part of what led me to this particular restriction, or not restriction, sorry, this mechanic for the cube of mirroring and like not having other things or additional things. And that is kind of the way that additional layers of what makes this cube different from other cubes change the level of how hard it is to get buy-in for the cube. And I've often said, I want to be able to pitch what is unique about this cube in one sentence that the people who are drafting can remember while they draft. Because if there are too many things that I have to say going into a draft that people want to remember because it's going to affect how they draft, that can really quickly get to be overwhelming. And I've kind of landed on exactly one thing, the fact that you can do mirrors, being the right number. I think that if I added another thing like, hey, everyone gets a Cogwork librarian, or hey, there are a few customs in here, or a few other ideas. People have suggested ideas of like, wouldn't this play better, you know? Hey, what if there were some non-basics in the basic land box to make the mana easier? And I'm like, genuinely, I think that would play better. Or Breaking Singleton is a really great example. Like, what if you were like, hey, you can duplicate any two cards, but also some cards are already duplicated. I did it for you. You can get two of them. Drafting really quickly, even if those things improve gameplay, they add this level of how much do you have to keep track of while you draft that I think adds a barrier. And in some ways, I've done my best to keep what do I need to say to people as simple as possible. I've got these little reminder cards that I give out as pack toppers that say how the mirrors work. And it's like just 3 lines to add a little bit of note that you can, you know, mirror 2 cards. They can't be the same card. You can switch them between games. And I don't want to push it any further than that. That's not to say that it's always wrong to add additional things that differ from the norm. To speak to this, right? Part of what each thing that you have to tell drafters at the start of drafting is a way that your cube diverges from the norm. And what the norm of a cube is a thing that changes over time. And the norm is not necessarily good or the best way to draft cube. And I think it gets called out a lot that like people will say, hey, yes, XYZ is the norm. It's the way people are used to drafting. Maybe we want to change that norm. And that's a really hard tension because you might agree. You might say, actually, yeah, I agree that breaking that norm, or at least being open to breaking that norm and thinking critically about why you're breaking it, is a really good thing to consider. And I want to respect people's comprehension space when I have a new rule like mirroring that they have to think about while they draft, of how many things are different than the cubes you're used to drafting, whether or not I agree that the way you're used to drafting is the right way, is the most fun and high agency way to draft. And I think that's a really interesting piece of tension that I don't have all the answers to and people could talk about a lot. But what I've chosen for this cube is exactly one way that it's different from like a classic cube experience.
Yeah, I think that simplicity is particularly valuable. Like the more that you can package into a single idea is so good because, like you said, people's eyes glaze over pretty quickly.
Yeah,
and you may bristle at the term, but it's really just like powerful marketing. When you're sitting down with your friends to be able to say, "Here's the experience I want you to have," and if you can summarize it, then then they can buy in more quickly. Like you said, the more you have to add to it, the less readily people are going to be willing to jump in.
Yeah.
At least on average, I should say.
Yeah, and there's a lot that you can do with card choices, but like ultimately, if you're not adding those layers of like recontextualization, you are sticking fairly closely to the formula of Magic the Gathering as people are used to playing it. And Magic the Gathering is not always a perfect system, and like draft that was based on these boosters that had a bunch of other needs beyond being good to draft with is not always a perfect system. And I do think, again, I really like the idea that sometimes I want to design with custom cards and extra rules. Sometimes I even want to design a game that is not Magic and that like takes a lot of the things that I value about emergent gameplay and like interactive decks that feel unique to a player and just totally play outside those rules. This cube is kind of a concession to the social spaces that I play in, and to say I'm going to make the best thing that also I can show up to any cube night anywhere and make friends and show them something that like I really like. My biggest goal for a cube is that I can sit down with a group of other people who want a cube and have a really good time and make friends. And I'm happy to make some concessions to like my ideal gameplay to just really be able to easily pull that off with whoever is excited to draft.
Right. You talked about earlier on that shared language and that value of just being able to communicate about the same things in the same way. It is really strong.
Yeah, I spent like 3 years like not so much playing Magic and designing my own card game, which was really, really fun. But it was hard not having that shared language and not being able to find new faces as easily. Most of the people who I was able to make play were people who were already my friends and they really liked the game. But without a shared language, I couldn't really talk about it to people online or meet new friends at the game store over it. And that pushed me back into Cube, plus living in a city where there was a great weekly Cube group coming around made me say, no, I prefer the shared language. This is a thing that I do with others.
That's great. I mean, that's part of why we're doing what you and I are doing right now, right? Is that we have this connection over a particular thing that we both have experienced.
And it's so lovely to get to be a part of that.
Well, Water the Weeds, as we are trending toward wrapping up here, I do get to ask you one of my favorite questions, which is, if you could have any card as a promo, what card would it be and who would you have do the illustration?
Yeah, it's a great question to ask. I immediately went to one of my favorite artists, No Bonzo, and they're like a anarchist street artist who does a lot of like line work. They did a illustrated copy of Kropotkin's Mutual Aid that's really beautiful. I really like their art because I think that it does a great job of imagining a better world and hopeful futures. It's like very beautiful and also meaningful to me. With art by No Bonzo, I was like, what is a card that I really enjoy playing with that also I think would be a good fit for their style and themes? Also, for what it's worth, I'm like, they would never work with Wizards of the Coast, and Wizards of the Coast would never work with them, and that doesn't matter because I live in Fantasyland.
I was like, wait, you mean an anti-establishment artist wouldn't work with like major production company? I don't understand.
No, but it's okay because I don't work with Wizards of the Coast for my card. And the card that I thought would be a great fit would be Wilderness Reclamation.
Hey, there you go.
It's a blast to play with, and if I had a little proxy for me, I would want No Bonzo to come up with whatever they wanted to come up with. I just think that they're a great artist and a great person.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you shared some of this art beforehand, just when we were looking at. It's really cool line work. It's kind of like almost comic book, kind of comic panel, just like really striking, heavy images there. Mm-hmm. I think that'd play really nicely on a card for sure.
Yeah, you can see I've toyed around with it when I was doing some custom sets.
That's so good. Well, Water the Weeds, thank you so much for being part of this. This is so fun to explore. I mentioned when we were first talking that, immediately upon completing a draft of this, I wanted to do it again. It's one of those projects that you think about time and again, and I'm hopeful that it encourages others as well. If folks want to learn more about this, perhaps run a test draft that you have orchestrated so thoughtfully on Cube Cobra that walks you through step by step how that works, or maybe they just want to reach out about your other projects, where should we point them?
Yeah, Discord, Water the Weeds. You'll find me in the Cube Talk Discord if you're not sure where to look. Cube Cobra, my name is also Water the Weeds. The cube's name is the Hall of Mirrors. Both should be something that you can find.
Very good. Easy enough. Well, truly, thank you for taking the time to do this. This has been a delightful chat, and I hope we get to do more of it in the days to come. But thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, kid. It's a great podcast. It is an honor to be on here because your podcast is what made me think, hey, I want to have a cube that has more identity. I really, really like seeing how other people talk about their cubes, and I'm ready to go from like this peasant cube I've had for 10 years. And then that brought me here. That brought me to building this one. So yeah, thank you.